Good morning, everyone. A year ago, we were in the middle of an election campaign that was going to wrap up on the 21st of October. And at the time, there were people who were saying that there were issues with election fraud and non-permanent residents voting and people getting election cards who shouldn't get election cards, permanent residents getting election cards when they shouldn't. And I think that this article is a little bit of controlled opposition, right? They're saying, "Oh, we admit there's issues, but nothing really bad happened. Like it was minor and it was spread out so wide that it couldn't possibly have impacted the election." That's basically what they're saying. I don't agree with a lot of the first part that I'm going to read, but I'm going to read it because I want you to understand what they're saying, okay? And then we're gonna look into why potentially this is the first time in 20 years this guy got a voter card in the mail when he's been a permanent resident for 19 years and he's never got one before. And I'll tell you why I think that this happened this time. And then we've got a lot of COVID to get into and cover. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So here we go. First, CBC News, Elections Canada probing thousands of 2019 election ballots. I want to make sure my sound is good. Yeah, it is. Election ballots with unclear evidence of citizenship. No evidence found of an organized effort to disrupt the electoral process, said agency. Elections Canada says it has identified roughly 3,500 cases of people who have voted in 2019's federal election where there was conflicting evidence about their citizenship, CBC News has learned. But almost a year after Canadians headed to the polls, the agency said it's still trying to determine how many of those cases, if any, involve non-Canadian citizens casting ballots. A fear of foreign nationals or permanent residents taking advantage of Canada's honor system and voting illegally was one of the most common themes Election Canada documented while monitoring social media in the lead up to the October 21st election, according to CBC's analysis of the agency's internal documents. Some people called on the agency to require voters to show proof of citizenship at the polls, such as a passport. You can get a study to say anything you want. I'm going to say that as a disclaimer before I read this part. Many studies in the U.S. have shown that stricter voter requirements, supposedly introduced to prevent fraud, have served as a form of voter suppression, deterring thousands of voters and disenfranchising racial minorities. Yeah, but you need to have identification to drive. You need to have identification to fly. You need to have identification to pick your kids up from school, but you don't need identification to vote? You know, the case is just crumbling. And disenfranchisement, maybe you don't want people who don't want to show ID voting, right? Seriously. And I'm not for disenfranchising people. I'm not for poll tests or anything like that, or having people who have one skin color have one test and people who have a different skin color have another test. I'm not like the Upper Grand District School Board in that I'm not racist. So, and I mean that. Thank you. But back to this elections. So I don't think that we should be artificially creating problems based on some polls in the U.S., right? And I don't think that we should be disenfranchising voters, but I think fundamentally we shouldn't be chopping people up into race and saying that these people are disenfranchised because they're a different skin color than white, and also they have to show identification and therefore disenfranchised. I think that it requires more than that. Says who? Says some studies in the United States? Which ones? Link to them, please. And I understand, again, the concern about disenfranchisement and, maybe some people don't have ID for XYZ reason. Okay, that's fine, but they should be responsible enough as a voter, as a citizen of the country, to get those things cleared up before election day, right? You should maybe get something in the mail or whatever to say you have this problem or whatever, this issue to blocking you to voting, right? But I don't think that showing ID is akin to disenfranchisement. I do not at all. Back to this. Elections Canada is still conducting its own analysis, but its initial assessment shows the 2019 ballots with conflicting citizenship information under review accounted for just 0.02% of all votes cast, and were so widely distributed they could not have affected the outcome in any particular riding. No outcome in any riding would have been affected by possible instances of non-citizen voting, said Elections Canada in a media statement. We have no evidence that suggests any organized or large-scale effort to disrupt the electoral process. No evidence to suggest it, but it took them a year to find 3,500 potential cases, and they don't even know if the problem occurred or not. They're still figuring that out. So I'm not surprised that they haven't found anything. Not shocked at all. Here it is. Every case has its own paper trail. In the spring of 2019, Elections Canada said it was eliminating 103,000 people from the federal voter registration who it determined were not Canadian citizens. Bill C-76 also gave Elections Canada the power for the first time to cross-reference its voter list with data from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada to search for cases of permanent residents or foreign nationals illegally voting. So they gave them these lists in order to cross-reference and make sure that these groups of people weren't voting. But instead what happened, permanent residents calls for stricter ID requirements. Permanent resident Paul Gabriel said, "It's incredible and scary that Election Canada has taken so long to detect such cases. He argues the agency should make changes before the next election to fix what he calls a loophole. It's illegal under the Canada Elections Act for non-Canadians a non-Canadian citizen to vote while knowing they're ineligible. However, voters are not required to show proof of citizenship at the polls." Gabriel said that should change. He's a fruit importer living in Berkshire. Oh, I've said that. I'm saying it terrible. He lives in a small town in Alberta. I think it's small. Who was born in the United Kingdom and has lived in Canada for 19 years. He said he erroneously received a voter information card in the mail for the first time in 2019 and posted a photo online with a warning that was shared by thousands of people. So I wonder why. I wonder why the first time in 20 years. I mean, look at how impressed he looks. He looks unimpressed. Doesn't he? It's like a British sitcom. So why do I think that happened? Well, for the first time, they got those lists, right? Those roles. So why? Whoops. I guess. Shucks. They're not going to say what they want to do directly, right? But they'll just go ahead and do it. All right, moving into COVID news. Jason Kenney says, an important statement from the World Health Organization, quote, "We in the WHO do not advocate lockdowns as the primary means of control of this virus. We really do appeal to all world leaders. Stop using lockdown as your primary control method." And so there's Dr. Tedros, PhD, scratching his head and looking frustrated, as all of the small business owners who are being crushed out of existence due to further lockdowns. Are you a gym or a restaurant or bar in Toronto or Peel or any of the other regions that have hotspots? I'm sorry, that's terrible. And man, it's time to do something. Jason Kenney carries on. Alberta's approach has never been to impose a lockdown. We had prudent, limited public health restrictions early in the COVID period to flatten the curve. While we expanded the capacity of our health system, our focus was and is on education and personal responsibility. Hey, Doug Ford, wouldn't it be lovely to live under somebody whose leadership, which you trust a little bit, right? And I mean, Jason Kenney and trust. Rocky. I'm not sure what to make of Jason Kenney at this point in time, but at least he's not unilaterally imposing lockdowns and blaming the public health bureaucracy, right? Like the group of public health people. They may call for lockdowns. They're wrong, and the data is wrong. Here is Spiked online, and it says, one of the basic principles of public health is that you do not just look at one disease, you have to look at health as a whole, including all kinds of diseases over a long period. That is not what has been done with COVID-19. I thought that was a good quote. And again, looking at the collateral damage, the unintended consequences, the cancer screenings that are going undone, the operations and surgeries that are going undone, there's a huge decrease in child surgeries, there's a huge decrease in cancer screenings. These are collateral damage that are going to take a lot longer to see. And the data, again, that they're quoting is not leading to a massive increase in numbers. And I'll show you. Because they're trying to make the case that it is. They're saying, oh, ICU numbers are increasing and hospitalization numbers are increasing. They're using flawed data. First flawed data here is the lawyer, the German lawyer who is litigating this tort case. And I think he's litigating it in multiple countries, Germany, the United States, internationally too, wherever he can get a foothold. He's registered in the bar in the United States and Germany, so I think that's how he's doing that. But there's a group of 4 lawyers who are working with him, or a group of lawyers, I think it's 4. Anyway, regardless, the entire interview is here. I just wanted to highlight it. It's in German, but it's got the English translations, presumably that's what they say. I don't know. I don't speak German, so I can't verify the translation, but it seems accurate. Doesn't seem like somebody would make that up. Here is an excerpt from this. It's all linked in the comments, but basically what it says is the PCR test is the only basis for us here in Germany. I'll get myself out of the way. Hold on. Sorry. The PCR test is the only basis for us here in Germany and worldwide for the assumption of a pandemic. The PCR test cannot and are not allowed to determine an infection. They are not approved for diagnostic purposes. This means that the actual basis for the assumption of a pandemic does not exist at all. PCR tests cannot and are not allowed to, the interview asks, PCR tests cannot and are not allowed to determine infection. And the person says that's exactly the case. As I said, on most packages, inserts, it is even warned, not approved for diagnostic purposes, or in the USA and Canada, not licensed for diagnostic purposes. They're simply not allowed to do this. However, someone did set out to ... And the reason I like the whole interview is because I wanted to find out what that ... said. But it's a longer ... and it's beyond the scope of the video, but go check it out. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting interview. I haven't finished watching it yet. I've watched, I don't know, probably 10 minutes of this guy on double speed. So I don't know. I've watched a little bit of it, but not enough to give a full kind of synopsis, but enough to say it's probably worth your time if you're concerned about PCR. And PCR tests, well, there's a whole explanation of kind of what they do. They just amplify, right? And so they amplify things that are in your body, and it might amplify something that is not actually. Hold on. He doesn't explain how a PCR test works here. He explains why using the PCR results as a determinant of infection is wrong. It can't determine infection. So it says. The interviewer says the PCR test, I want to get back to the statement, the PCR test cannot and is not allowed to determine the infection. Where do the numbers come from that we read and hear every day on television, radio, and various media? These are the results of the PCR tests. These are the tests that were performed with whatever PCR tests were used. There are now 300 to 500 tests, I believe, but they all work on the same principle. The PCR test itself is a super thing, invented by an American researcher, Carrie Mullis, who I think even received a Nobel Prize for it. It's a highly sensitive test that determines everything as accurately as possible. However, as it is highly sensitive, it has a high error rate. But you don't have to bother with that question once you know it's not suitable and not intended to determine infections. So if someone tests positive, then this can mean any number of things. Only one thing it does not mean, namely an infection. Infections can only be determined when a person also has symptoms. It is absolutely certain that PCR tests, if they are positive, say nothing about an infection. So that's interesting to note, and I think another thing that's been left out of the public discussion about all of this. Here's the whole interview if you want to read it or listen to it. Here is another interview talking about, well, this is a Rebel News investigation talking about how the number of COVID-19 cases and deaths is being inflated. It says Ontario has been adding data from previous months to its daily tally when coming up with record-breaking figures. Andrew Says TV has the story, and it's interesting. This minute-long clip is interesting. I'll leave the link in the description. You can check it out there. But I wanted to show you a couple of things as well. Canada reports 5 new coronavirus deaths as cases surpass 180,000. They're giving you totals. This is the Ontario total here, and we're going to look at this in a minute. But they're giving you totals because the weekly and daily rates are really small. Canada has reported 1,685 new cases of the novel coronavirus on Sunday, as well as 5 new deaths. That's Canada-wide. The new data brings the country's total number of COVID-19 infections to 181,678, and its death toll from the virus to 9,613. Though Alberta, BC, and all the territories except the Yukon did not release updates on their case figures. I scroll down a little bit. Quebec announced 942 new cases on Sunday, raising its total COVID-19 cases to 86,133. No new deaths were reported by the province, though 3 earlier fatalities not previously announced were added to the provincial death toll. How does that work? That's one example of padding the numbers, right? Like, oh yeah, well, nobody died yesterday, but there were 3 new deaths that we found out were definitely COVID deaths, and we had to add them yesterday. So it looks like there's 3. Here's the Ontario numbers, because this is important. 32 in ICU, 32 on a ventilator, 51 in ICU, and 217 hospitalized. And we've got data here. So yay, there's data and there's graphs, which is great. And here's these record-breaking cases. October 7th, 583 cases. October 8th. 797. And the deaths on October 7th and 8th are, 8th has 4 deaths, and the 7th has, it's going to be annoying to highlight, less than that. 8, where are you, the 7th? The 7th may have no deaths. Okay. Sorry if I can't find it. This data tool is not as good as some other ones. So the 7th, I think, has 1 death maybe. Yeah, 1 death. Okay, so to compare, now let's do April. April 18th has 485 cases, and April 17th has 564, and here's April 18 has 36 deaths. April 17 has, I'm sure, okay, 55 deaths. There's no comparison between those two numbers that makes the second wave scary, right? And I think that it is irresponsible to continue this kind of stuff. Maybe I could have done the table, eh? Ooh, I guess that would have been quicker, wouldn't it? Sorry, everyone. But still, I think that the graph does the job sufficiently enough. You can clearly see as well the case numbers are higher than the first wave, and the death numbers are clearly not. Clearly not. Despite these 2 days, and I think 70 of these deaths or 74 of these deaths were data cleaning, like to force Doug Ford to lock down businesses again. I'm not sure. Time to take Jason Kenney's strategy, Mr. Ford, and open us up. Here's Kulvinder Kaur, and she's a doctor, and she says, why are Western countries not modeling Sweden's success? This is a great question. This is from September. It's an evidence-based model following pre-2020. No lockdowns, mass school closures or mandatory masks, no second wave. In Sweden, likely they got natural herd immunity. It shows a logical path to balance risk, liberty, and economy. So yeah, I mean, it seems irrational not to follow that model. It seems irrational to buy into the continued fear, and especially when you can see these numbers. Like, it's not hard, right? Like, it's really not hard. Maybe it is. They do make it difficult to get here. You have to click on, like, go to the extra. You have to have a /data. So, I mean, they do make steps that you have to jump through, which is annoying. Here is getting into masking. This is from Alberta, copied from a friend, but tweeted by the Alberta Wild Rose. It says Connie, Alberta. It says, I've been reluctant to enter the mask debate, but here I go. I bounce between Alberta and British Columbia for business, and I've always been hypervigilant when it comes to germs. I'm also a keen observer of human behavior. There's no mask wearing mandate for indoor public spaces in Vancouver, but there is in Calgary and Edmonton. The baristas in the coffee shop I frequent in Vancouver's West End do not wear masks, nor do most customers. That scenario plays out throughout the city, although many businesses require their employees to wear masks, and a small number demand that customers wear masks. In Calgary and Edmonton, masks are everywhere and have been for a couple of months. Yet the COVID numbers are far worse per capita in Calgary and Edmonton than comparatively maskless Vancouver. There are many factors, of course, but is the mask mandate misguided malpractice? Masks are effective in limiting the spread of disease in hospitals, so why is it not working on a wider scale? Is it because untrained members of the public touch their faces more when wearing a mask and reuse too often? Is it because people get a false sense of security? Are these mask-wearing COVID superheroes being careless when they return home and doff their alter egos? Your input is welcome. And that's an interesting question. All of those are interesting questions. And here's another interesting question. And I call this manufacturing consent, right? This is Global News reporting. Coronavirus face masks are mandatory outdoors in Italy. Should Canada do the same? This is the same kind of stuff they pulled when they were polling about how much basic income would it take for you to stay home and obey the lockdown measures, and will you wear masks if you was mandated to go into businesses and things? I saw polls, I saw people have rumors and all sorts of stuff like that about that, just like this. And I've seen the same rumors on Twitter. The UK, same thing. And it's not surprising because the UK, Ireland had the same. I saw a clip this morning and I couldn't find it, but it was the Ireland legislature talking about COVID deaths, and the legislator said if somebody dies of a heart attack or comes into the hospital of a heart attack and passes away and then tests positive for COVID after they're dead, but they died of a heart attack, is that a COVID death? And the gentleman who was answering the question, and this is why I'm ashamed that I can't find it, basically said, yeah, that's the World Health Organization classification of a COVID death, and you're darn tootin'. That's exactly what we do here in Ireland. And it's exactly what we do here in Canada too, right? So if you're unfortunate and get, brought into the hospital of a heart attack and you test positive for COVID, despite the high false positive rate of the PCR testing, right, and the high cycle counts that we use, Above 25 increases the likelihood of a false positive, right? We use 35 to 45, as far as I know. So that's concerning, right? Because that's padding the numbers, right? So should we make masks mandatory outside? What do you think? I think no. I think it's a terrible, awful, terrible idea, and we should have the masks off. But the Ontario legislature is going the other way. Here's Tony Hillier, and he says, this is totally unacceptable that the Ministry of Labour is demanding the few hospitality workers still employed must wear goggles at pubs. I'll be contacting the people to deal with that. He says Monty McNaughton, and that is MPP for LKM, Ontario Minister of Labour. So he'll be contacting the Minister of Labour about that. And this is Chelsea, and she says the Ministry of Labour came into the pub this morning. After 45 minutes of nonsense, we now have to wear safety goggles to serve tables. Yep. So this is not, well, yesterday I asked what is going on, and I talked about Build Back Better. So I think I'm going to put this here, Build Back Better. And the Build Back Better situation is described perfectly here. 3424, he talks about the whole plan. And I watched this and I thought, he nailed it. Right here, the 34 to 36 ending when he changes the topic from this Great Reset, and like this whole segment here is just spot on, exactly what's happening. And thank you for pointing it out. Somebody sent it to me yesterday saying this explains what you're talking about. And holy cow, like, yeah, really, for real. This is a scary, scary situation. And well, I mean, I don't know how to, I've said it before, I don't know how to fight it, because it doesn't matter. It's because you've got layers, right? And the layers are exactly what happened to Faith Golding, and exactly the same playbook was used on Bernier, and exactly the same playbook is being rolled out and tested with the new Liberal or the new Conservative Party, except that I think maybe people are sick enough of Trudeau that they might, well, it would take the NDP to bring the government down, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I think we're going to finish out their term, but they might allow Aaron O'Toole to take the helm for a little while. But anyway, this is just terrifying, and I think it's exactly right. So go watch it. It's Computing Forever, I guess. And I've seen him before. He's quite good. He's quite thorough. So go check out this video. The whole thing's worthwhile. But if you only watch two or 3 minutes of it, watch the 34 to 37 minute part. And then pick your jaw up off the floor. Hold on, I think I got to reorganize. At the end of this section, he talks about how the financial reset is the controlled demolition of the economy, and then to be replaced by an electronic currency that will be tied to social score, just like China, which they already do this, right? China's already done this. And so when they roll out this new money and they roll out the social score, well, here's Greg. Like, they'll need to have electronic currency like Bitcoin, but easier, and then they can track everything, right? Track every transaction, all the money you make, right? And so Greg says the media has been dripping this for a while before COVID, but especially since, now resurgence today. And Bill Tuff says Pandemic 201. This is the pandemic practice episode that happened in 2019. Unlimited bailouts of cash by countries until finally they crumble under the weight of the debt. Unable to pay back, they will have to approach the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. Unable to bail everyone out, the IMF would remonetize the whole system in SDRs. So the money that I was just talking about, the social credit system, that's basically happening. So, man, like I said, watch this and be absolutely chilled to the bone about why this is happening, right? I say, why is this happening? I know why this is happening. This guy puts it together in 3 minutes. Boom. And it's worth it. It's worth the watch. Okay, back to a little bit of COVID stuff before I finish out with Canadian politics. Okay, here is, it's impossible to ignore. We're staring into a future where the already normalized riots, murders, persecutions of religious minorities, and endless scientific measures preside over humanity and human dignity and liberty. And the media cheers it on. Which way, America? Because this is about New York issuing $15,000 fines to Orthodox Jewish institutions over COVID violations. So there were a whole bunch of Orthodox Jewish people having a protest in Brooklyn the other day, and they got big fines for that. So Black Lives Matter, no fines. Orthodox Jewish people, big fines. that's a problem, right? And that's coming everywhere. That's happening everywhere. Here's a Laval police officer. He's resigns after posting "The pandemic does not exist." This is Montreal Gazette. Maxime Oumet, sorry, I forgot that wrong. Maxime says he's a 12-year vet of the force, saw his Terrebonne business firebombed hours after one of his Facebook posts. A Laval police officer has resigned from the force after posting comments on social media denying the existence of the pandemic and calling Premier François Legault a dictator. Maxime Oumet, a 12-year veteran, resigned on Friday, Laval police confirmed to the Montreal Gazette on Saturday. Earlier in the week, the Journal de Montreal revealed Oumet had been assigned to desk duty following his controversial posts. In one, he wrote he would never destroy a person's life by issuing a ticket for not respecting public health regulations aimed at preventing the spread of COVID-19. I took him off the road in an urgent way, Laval Police Chief Pierre Bouchet told the Journal de Montreal, adding Oumet had been assigned to desk duty and was the subject of an internal investigation. Among other things, Oumet wrote he had been working since the beginning of the crisis and there is no pandemic. He claimed wearing masks was pointless and that emergency rooms are empty. I've been a police officer for 12 years to help serve and protect the people. I will no longer be a tool of the government to satisfy and establish its dictator. He posted in French on Tuesday. I say no to Premier François Legault. What you are doing is illegal and unconstitutional. The Facebook page titled Police de People pour le people, a police officer of the people and for the people, includes a photo of Oumet wearing his police uniform. On Thursday, he wrote that his badge will leave me tomorrow. I swear to you that 75% of the police officers in Quebec have a heart of gold like me. They're formidable colleagues who really put their lives and mental health in peril for citizens every day. Hours after Oumet posted that message, a business he owns in Terrebonne, I won't mention the name just because I can't read it. It was firebombed. When firefighters arrived, they noticed the salon's windows had been broken. The business's sprinkler system had been set off and extinguished. No one has been arrested in connection with the firebombing that took place sometime after 11 p.m. on Thursday. Oumet later confirmed on a different Facebook page that someone had tossed a Molotov cocktail inside his salon. He reported that his business was heavily damaged by the water and expressed dismay that his 12 employees would be out of work for weeks. Oumet did not reply for a request to an interview, for an interview. Isn't that wild, right? Like if you go up against these people, you will be firebombed, right? This is an unmistakable message. Don't you dare, right? Don't you dare. Very interesting. Very interesting. New Brunswick says Micmac students from Quebec no longer welcome. This is interesting. Basically, they go to a high school. They go to the same high school, but they're deemed not essential travelers. So here it is. The Canadian press and the New Brunswick government has informed the Micmac Nation on the Quebec side of the provincial boundary that their students are no longer welcome to attend high school in New Brunswick as the province tightens the Atlantic bubble. More than 100 students from the Micmac First Nation, along with the rest of the students in Sugarloaf High School in Campbellton, New Brunswick, were kept home Friday after a staff member tested positive for COVID-19. The school will be closed for several days while it disinfects and while contract tracers work on the case. The chief says New Brunswick officials informed him that the school would resume Thursday, but without his Indigenous students who are not considered essential travelers allowed to cross the provincial boundary. They will now study online where their Campbellton classmates head back to school. Yeah, equality, except that, it's not, right? Interesting. Here's a Maxime Bernier interview, and it says, listen to my interview with Andrew Crystal at the SXM Canada Talks. We discuss masks, lockdown, the economic situation, my court case against Kinsella, and other topics. And I haven't listened to the interview yet, but check it out. It's interesting. And the last one is the Fraser Institute. It says, Trudeau government deals another blow to Newfoundland and Labrador. I wanted to mention this as well. They're using this same mechanism to try and kill the rail line that bypasses BC to go to Alaska to offload the Alberta rail or the Alberta oil. So I think they're going to probably use the same thing to kill it. But Newfoundland and Labrador's energy sector already struggling from a downturn in world oil markets and the COVID recession has taken another blow, this time directly from Ottawa. The Trudeau government recently imposed new rules known collectively as the Strategic Assessment of Climate Change, SACC, that requires certain projects, including mines and oil and gas projects, to describe how the project will achieve net zero emissions. According to Federal Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, the plan will ensure Canada exceeds its Paris Climate Agreement targets by 2030 and 2050. They're going to spend a lot of money on taxing it making projects like this that would normally be good and net gains to Canada and to the province and to the country, like to the community, to the city, to the province and the country, everybody, right? Everybody gains from projects like this because they make money, they make jobs, they make people rich, but that's not a bad thing, right? Like that's not a bad thing. You can also get rich is the point, right? Like there's a lot of churn in that 1%, right? Like if you get money, it takes a lot to keep the money, right? And if you can keep the money, then great, right? But if you can't, there's more room for other people at the top. And that's money recirculating. Isn't that what Lucas says? What's the money doing in Vegas, Lucas? Recirculating, right? So there's an opportunity for you to also get rich. And rich for you, maybe, not rich to other people, right? And that's the point. Not for government to give you enough to live on. It's the point of opportunity, right? And so, like I said, projects like this are good for everyone because they offer opportunity like that. But not when you can't get the project off the ground in the first place because you can't get the approval, or the approval takes 5 years, right? Who's got money to burn 5 years down the line? Like, I've got a project, it uses that right there. Can I use that right there? 5 years later, you've got the project, and the people who maybe you could sell it to have got their goods from somewhere else, right? Like, there's no point, right? Like if you see an opportunity, you've got to jump on it. And if you can't jump on it because of regulation, that's not helping people, right? That doesn't create the jobs. That doesn't create the wealth. If Alberta goes broke, all of those transfer payments to Quebec stop, right? All of the transfer payments, equalization payments to the other provinces stop, right? That's not good for everybody. That's a net negative. That's a bad thing, right? So we should be enabling these projects. We should be allowing these projects to go forward. Having trains catch on fire and explode in small communities is a bad thing. We should also be building pipelines. Sending a carrier, a tanker, all the way around the Panama Canal is a bad thing. We should have a pipeline that would be more environmentally friendly. These things are obvious if you think about it for 10 seconds. And if you haven't been completely indoctrinated by the far left environmental crazy wingnuts. Wingnuts, yes. And I mean that too. All right, that's enough out of me today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, check out SpeakingMoistly.co, and Greg and I are scheduled to record for tomorrow, so that should be fun as well. And have a wonderful, it's Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you have a wild party, 11 or more. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.